Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Bonjour à toutes.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Welcome to this session. I'm sure you've already had quite an exciting full day. You must be tired. So we're going to make sure that, you made the right choice by coming here. And we have a spectacular panel with us. So stay tuned. This is the room where you have to be. So my name is Batil Misika. I work for the OECD Development Center. We host a network of foundations working for development. And it is, again, my great pleasure and honor to welcome you to this session that's going to unpack how philanthropy can achieve impact. It's going to look at the modalities used by philanthropy, what kind of donor. And let me tell you already, we're going to talk about trust-based philanthropy. This is not a session about morals. It's not who's the good guy and trust and he's nice and who is not a good guy or has taken a more political stance. There's many different ways to engage as a philanthropist, from de-risking to piloting initiatives to being an operating foundation. And we want to cover that spectrum. So with that in mind, I am together with a very impressive panel that are going to tell us about how they harness their resources, how they achieve impact, and what it means for them to do trust-based philanthropy. So to my right, Sigrid van Aken, who is CEO of Nova Media and chair of the boards of the National Postcode Lottery, the Vrienden, I don't know how to pronounce that, sorry, Vrienden Lotteries, and the parent company holding National Gold Dolen Lotteries. Now I've butchered it. My Dutch is not fluent yet, my apologies. But dear Sigrid, it is an absolute pleasure and honor to welcome you. You're also a member of our network, so we're very excited to welcome you here. Further to my right, Alex Soros, who is the chair of the board of directors at the Open Society Foundations. I'm not going to go through my panelists' biographies, but I think Alexander Soros probably doesn't need introductions. We're extremely honored and excited that he is with us today. To my left, Samira Mera, who works for Wings. She is the Collective Intelligence and Advocacy Director. Great pleasure to have you with us, Samira. And last but not least, Juan Jacquet, who is Vice President and China Chief Representative for United Way Worldwide. We will be joined also by some distinguished discussants, time permitting, so allow me to jump right in because our time is quite limited. But I would like to give them a welcome. We have Eric Pawlowski, who is Vice President and Senior Advisor to the Rockefeller Foundation President. Welcome, dear Eric. Vanina Laurent-Ledru, who is about to join us because she's still talking. She's in high demand. She's talking in another session. We have James Dray, who is partner at the Brunswick Group, and Christophe Salmon, Délégué Général at Fondation Crédit Mutuel Alliance Fédérale. Thank you for being with us. And Antonio Zappulo, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Welcome, Antonio, and many of our dear friends here. So allow me to start with you, Sigrid. The Postcode Lottery Group giving model is strongly focused on what some like to call trust-based philanthropy, but which involves giving core funding, so non-earmarked funding, to organizations. So, entrusting them with that power to make the right choices. So how does it work in practice in terms of the modalities, maybe also the limitations? And the question that we all, I think, want to ask you is it a blank check? Because it sounds very tempting. And does your board like that it's a blank check? Or do you tell them something else so that they don't get too scared? Over to you, dear Sigrid.
Thank you very much, Batil. And first of all, thank you, the organization of the Paris Peace Forum. I think you're doing a wonderful job, especially in the world of today. It's so important that we connect, that we join forces, and that we collaborate. And I really have been inspired by all the sessions so far. Also, a lot of positive results have been shared, and there's a lot of international collaboration. And to be honest, my favorite part of the Paris Peace Forum is the espace des solutions, the space for solutions. I think this really illustrates the variety of initiatives everywhere around the world, where people simply take initiative and devote their lives to make the world a better place. And they all have a lot of positive impacts of the lives of millions of people around the world. And that exactly is the vision of the Postcode Lottery Group, because we believe that the civil society is a force for good, is a force for change. And so very often we see that change in society starts with initiatives from the civil society. And therefore, our sole mission is to raise funds for charities, for social organizations working to build a fair, green and healthy world. And so we support many sectors, all linked to SDGs, whether it's nature and environment, human rights, free press, health, poverty alleviation. All those initiatives get support from the Postcode Lottery Group. So we are an international company, we are owned by a foundation, and we are currently active in 5 European countries. And I'm really excited to share with you that currently, 2023, we raise, and so we also donate, an amount of close to $1 billion every year. And so we enter into long-term partnerships with around 1,000 organizations. And our funding philosophy for already more than 34 years has been that we are the fundraisers and our recipients, their charity partners, know best how to spend the money and how to make a difference. And therefore, unrestricted, flexible funding is really at the core of our grant making. And so let me briefly explain what we do. How do we do this fundraising? So we do that by setting up and organizing community lotteries. It's a form of community fundraising, and so we engage with millions of people by selling subscriptions. People pay a monthly amount of around 15 euros, and with this membership, they take part in our lotteries, in the draws, and of course they can win wonderful prizes. And actually the lottery format is unique, because the lottery number is your postcode, and so people, neighbors, play together and they win together. And so this also stimulates a sense of community, and our organization loves to bring people together. So you can imagine the last couple of years, many people in this room know all about it. It has been very difficult for the civil society all over the world. And there is a high demand from the civil society to get our funding. And so we are expanding our operations, our community fundraising, and our model, luckily enough, has proved to be resilient in the past couple of years. And we are growing our fundraising. So also for people in the audience from France, maybe good to know that also here in France, there is untapped potential. There's research that shows that a postcode lottery in France potentially could mean at least an amount of 1 billion euros a year that could be raised for the French civil society. And imagine what that could mean for all those initiatives across France. Year on year, 1 billion euros. And it's important to underline that our initiatives is a proven concept. And it has been researched that community lotteries can coexist next to existing lotteries like state lotteries and like here in France, Française des Jeux. There are no negative effects, and together we can raise even more funds for society. And also for the politicians probably in the audience, it's good to know that this type of activity, to implement it in France, doesn't cost the government a single euro. So to summarize, over 3 decades, we have been active in our funding strategy that's based on unrestricted long-term funding. Organizations can apply for funding, and after due diligence, we enter into these long-term partnerships based on trust. And so, to conclude, there is more and more academic proof that multi-year unrestricted funding leads to stronger NGOs, makes them financially stronger because our money is a catalyst to get other sources of money. NGOs can reallocate their funding in response to changing needs. And also they can invest in less glamorous work like core cost or infrastructure. And last but not least, here at the Paris Peace Forum, it's all about changing the world for the better. And to do that, you have to empower organizations to take risks, to think big, and to collaborate. And that's exactly what unrestricted long-term funding is all about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sigrid. So, a quite unique model where you, crowdsource from. So, it's private money, but coming from the public, not coming from a private source, and entrusting and building the capacity, the on-the-ground capacity of organizations endeavored with delivering the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030 agenda. Now, that said, is that the only way to do trust-based philanthropy? Well, that's certainly one example, but I'm going to turn now to you, Alexander, because it's also about supporting areas and partners that are marginalized or that people are forgetting about. That are hard to fund, so they're maybe leaving no one behind or going to that last mile. So why have you and the Open Society Foundations made a commitment to funding some issues and some regions that many funders find, well, difficult to accept? So are you taking a stance on purpose to come in where others are not going, and is that your the way on the trust-based principle that you work with your grantees? Thank you.
Thanks. I don't think that we feel that what we're funding is controversial or unpopular. But maybe other philanthropies and other people do. And when it comes to the types of causes that Open Society stands for, I mean, a lot of it's in in our name. But I think as much as this is theoretical and ideological, I also firmly believe that in the case of my father and also in the case of the Foundation's first ever president, R.A. Nair, legendary human rights activist and lawyer, it was also deeply personal and I dare say sentimental. I don't think that you can divorce the causes that OSF engages in and the stands, let's say, that my father has taken from his own what he says is the most formative experience, which is living in hiding and by by a stroke of luck, not winding up dead during the Holocaust. And this feeling of solidarity with people that are going through similar things that as he himself endured in his life, and I think that that's precisely why he was so keen to act very quickly in Sarajevo when a lot of international agencies were too hamstrung to act. The role of philanthropy was to go in, but he personally saw elements of his childhood playing on stage. Our commitment to the largest ethnic minority across Europe, and I apologize to our French host to talk about people's ethnicities and identities as something valuable, but the Roma is also based off of the fact that this shared solidarity in a persecuted people, and it's also about just the basic fundamental values of human rights. And if I think it says something about the state of the world that to fund human rights is controversial. But I think there's another aspect. I think and this is more in sort of the technical point, and I apologize. I usually don't speak about philanthropy and the internal matters of OSF. But I think in the wake of rising, what we call rising authoritarianism, it was important to take a stand. It was important that civil society and that people in the public square are not silent. It's important that philanthropy, that business, is not silent. So we embraced this idea of political philanthropy, which is that sometimes you got to take sides. Sometimes there is a right and there is a wrong. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not. Always gray, and also that as much as we want to talk about what philanthropy can change and what philanthropy, which in an American context is tax deducted funds from from the IRS. If we don't have a functioning democracy, if we don't have a functioning society, if we don't have trust between citizens, philanthropy won't be able to accomplish anything. So the way that I think, so I'll just end by saying the way I think that impacts our work is also, that, we fund people, we fund organizations, we fund, people in civil society, but also with a long-term view that they are agents of change, and oftentimes they know better and more than we do. While I don't want to preach selflessness, I think some of the greatest things we've done no one knows about, we won't get credit for, and that's great. The point is to fund the people in the field actually doing the work, and having the most impact. With that said, we have the ability to take more risk. We're a single donor organization, and we're only accountable to the law and ourselves. And so I think that means that that we should, and we should continue, obviously, to take, to be on the path we're on, and take more risks and embrace these causes that everybody says are so controversial and unpopular, et cetera.
Thank you very much. So we see already a very contrasted example whereby this is philanthropy that I would dare say associates itself with civil society and its causes, because that's a debate we've often had. Is philanthropy civil society? It can support civil society. Can you consider, sometimes it's just a terminology issue whereby you think that anything that's not government is going to be civil society. But in your case, you're also reintroducing trust, but as the currency, as the glue that needs to bind society together. So it's a set of grantees and partners that you accompany, but on topics that are considered probably much more politicized and in context where many of your fellow philanthropists maybe would not go. But the same principle of we're in it together, and we're trying to work towards a greater good, a democratic, peaceful more equal ideal. So I'm now going to turn to you, Samira. So Samira, you work for WINGS, which is a global network of grantmaker associations, so network of networks of foundations. You have this philanthropy transformation initiative. So when it comes to these discussions on trust-based philanthropy and how it is, what's the blue book of how also your foundations, your members tell you that they think they should be supporting members, and also on the other side from civil society, what are you hearing?
Thanks, Bethel, and hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here as part of this discussion. So just to take a step back, the Philanthropy Transformation Initiative is a collective, unified effort of philanthropy networks, advisors, research institutions, and funders from across the world to really say, okay, how can we challenge and our own sector and practices to do things differently, to create greater impact and address root causes rather than just symptoms. And this becomes really, really important in the context that we find ourselves, whether you call it polycrisis or multi-crisis. There is war, conflict, climate crisis, unchecked technological developments that could mean so much for humanity, deepening inequality. So within all of this, we really need to take a moment to step back and reflect on our very existence and the future of humanity. And at the end of the day, philanthropy is about the love of humanity. We are learning a lot, and this is a continuous process. And so the first learning I'll share is we've come up with 3 mindset shifts that philanthropy, including foundations, need to make. 1, moving from the mindset of being an implementer with our own targets to being an enabler, to losing control and to being at the service of others, communities, movements, but also other sectors like the private sector and government, because creating the conditions for us to come together and work together is going to have an outsized impact. The second mind shift is to use philanthropies, all of its assets, so going beyond grant making, so looking at endowments, looking at using operations, networks, influence, governance, boards, executive leadership, and organizational culture, and uniting all of this behind values. And so going from grant making to change making, because all of these levers have a massive impact for change. And then the third mindset is, how do we take a longer term perspective? How do we keep the future of humanity in sight and reflect on the type of society we're contributing to building tomorrow, because the actions we're taking now will impact that. Trust-based philanthropy is one of the 10 principles within this Philanthropy Transformation Initiative framework, and we believe it's suited best to address these complex, entangled challenges, much like top-down, rigid approaches can't. I'm going to use a framework, you might have come across it, scaling up, scaling out, and scaling deep to consolidate some of the learning. Scaling up at an organization level. So at the core of trust-based philanthropy, we've heard it's about giving up some control, core unrestricted funding, trusting our partners, looking at reporting, looking at sharing decision-making power at different levels, whether it's at the board or throughout the implementation cycle, so ideation right through to development. And at the very core, it's about embracing with humility those who are most proximate to the challenges, that they have the social capital, they have the networks, they have the influence, they have the expertise and knowledge to know how to address those challenges. We need to work to strengthen the conditions to support that agency. Agency already exists. Experiences from the pandemic and from closing civic space, there's been a lot of research done to make the case that these practices are important. We have examples on the panel, in the room, and beyond of foundations adopting such practices. So the question we really need to ask ourselves is, how come everyone hasn't shifted yet? And so rather than being special examples, we need to go beyond. We need to scale out and scale deep. What do I mean by scale out? We need to accelerate the change and adoption of these practices in the field. Maybe one challenge that's preventing this from happening is support infrastructure around successful trust-based models and relationships. There are a few ways of tackling that. At WINGS, we're addressing this by working to map, support, strengthen, and invest in philanthropy ecosystems. This is like a network of interconnected organizations and infrastructure like networks, advisory firms, donor-advised funds, giving platforms, giving movements, and so much more that do 2 things. They work to grow giving, and they work to strengthen the conditions for giving to thrive, which is linked to civil society. Having resourced, well-connected ecosystems at the local, regional, and global level can help a faster adoption of these practices, and it also helps unlock local resources, both financial and non-financial, for locally led development. Another example of scaling out is investing in cross-sector coalitions and partnership infrastructure to support and strengthen multi-stakeholder partnerships, the funding for which can be limited or in some cases actually declining. So investing in them is really, really important. And this can expand space for innovations. An example I'll share is our Latin America and Caribbean working group. The members got together and they co-authored a paper, Strangers No More, Public Development Banks and Philanthropy. And it's all about the rules of engagement and how public development banks and philanthropy can work together. The next step is to say, okay, can we have an engagement group that brings together the public development banks, and the foundations to talk about pooling funds to achieve the SDGs. Lastly, scaling deep. In order to shift from being a niche practice, we need this really to become the norm. So as Indy Johar says, this requires a deep code transformation into our very ideas of ourselves, ideas of how we exist with the world, how we relate to the world, and how we relate to each other. Change is deeply rooted and must be deeply rooted in people, relationships, and culture. It's needed and it's complex. So how do we go about doing this? Many different ways. Two that I'm going to highlight. Well, let's understand by mapping our own privilege and power to create change. I come across the importance of influencing boards and trying to create buy-in as a challenge across the board. Being able to tackle that can create a lot of internal organizational transformation that can have a ripple impact. And so to take this to the next level of deep coding, I think we need to invest in transformational learning, storytelling, and communities of practice.
Thank you so much, Samira. Sorry, we're in a bit in a rush, but very well taken. You've introduced the idea that it also, trust-based philanthropy also involves financial and non-financial support, which means, your problems are my problems, I give you access to market. So that seems to defeat a bit the analogy that's been done between the giving of Mackenzie Scott, that's supposed to be trust-based, but that does not involve any non-financial support or not even the contacts. Just want to point it out, maybe for a later debate. Is that really the ultimate trust-based philanthropy model, or are we talking about something else? That said, I'd like to be devil's advocate for 1 second. It all sounds great. If I were, and we're going to turn to you, Yuan, in a second, if I were a grassroots organization, I would love for you to trust me and help me, give me unearmarked funding, help me when nobody else is helping me. But look at it for a second. Foundations also called up to action. What is your impact? What are you going to do? Tell me, how are you expressing, basically, what is your theory of change? So it becomes very hard to then hide entirely behind what it is that your grantees are helping you achieve. So we're in that middle of a tension where foundations are asked to step up, to speak in their own name, while they're also asked to say, trust them, and this is the time to localize. So is that compatible? I'm going to turn to you, Yuan, and thank you for your patience. So you're on the other side of the fence because you're on the receiving end of some unearmarked grants from foundations. So what's your viewpoint? What do others maybe that receive also unearmarked funding need to be mindful of? What are your takeaways of being, on the lucky side of having received that trust and this support to do your work?
Thank you. It's an honor to be on this panel, and just kind of, again, step back a little bit. I'm actually wearing 2 hats today. The position I'm transitioning out of is the Vice President and China Chief Representative of United Way Worldwide, which is a U.S. nonprofit with 130-year history and mobilizes about $5 billion a year, operate in 40 countries and 1,800 communities around the world. And my new role today is the founder of Ethno Fund on the receiving end. a new fund that is aiming to help China's next generation entrepreneurs and the family offices to navigate philanthropy. So, I mean, let me take a kind of a slightly different angle to answer the sort of the trust-based philanthropy question. I mean, there are unique opportunities and challenges, I mean, for the China market, because on the one hand, China is going through arguably, I mean, the greatest wealth transition in history, because the first generation entrepreneurs that made the money after the market opening up, that was about 40 years ago, are now in their either late 60s or in their early 70s. So they're passing their wealth to their second generation, and unlike their parents, usually the second generation Chinese entrepreneurs are mostly well-educated, and usually they're educated in the West. So in addition to make money, they actually care about, I mean, contribute to a better world. So that's the opportunity side. But the challenger side, it really is they're ambitious, right? They don't do small things, and they're I mean, they ask a lot of questions, and they're so new, I mean, to this topic. So it makes extremely difficult for a lot of the NGOs, especially grassroots NGOs, to serve, I mean, these donors. So that's, I mean, why we're setting up Ethno. We're really sort of playing the hand-holding role, not only to serve the second-generation entrepreneurs, but also really to help them to navigate their philanthropy journey.
Thank you very much. Well, so we've heard various accounts of what trust-based philanthropy means. We can see how it can be, you know, used for good. But I'm going to now turn to our discussants, because what I would like to hear is maybe one point of agreement you have, you know, with, you know, also your interpretation along the lines of what this panel has said on trust-based philanthropy, and maybe one thing where you would slightly or violently disagree. So, Vanina, if you allow me, I will start with you. So, one point on, you know, trust-based philanthropy, how that resonates with you, and maybe a point where you would nuance a little bit what you've heard.
Thank you, Batil, and thank you, everybody, for being in this room with us. I think it shows the powers of philanthropy. So, philanthropists, let's unite and conquer. With this quick thing, Foundation S is the philanthropic organization supported by Sanofi. So we work in health, and we're structured as a think and do tank. And I'm mentioning this structure because I think it is very important that we also push the boundaries of what we have thought philanthropy was about until now. And that, in my mind, we have a critical role as money holders to agitate, innovate, and orchestrate for societal issues. And when I see that philanthropies right now are only committing 1% of our overall combined balance sheet to climate, that gets me worried. So I think it's changing now, and I very much welcome that. But I think if we are truly to create trust with the communities that we want to serve, we also owe it to them to focus on the topic that are actually endangering their very lives. So climate is one of them, and I'd like to mention that. And the last thing I'll say is, if we come back to the title of this roundtable, which is maximizing the role of philanthropy in the age of multi-crisis, it's again so important that we maximize also our collective power. And by this, I mean that we maximize the leverage impact that philanthropy can have by pooling funds, by working in public-private partnerships, by ensuring that we create trust, breaking silos, and not just working with our own foundation strategies and visions. So that's what I have to say on trust-based philanthropy, which is actually break the model and innovate, because we can be stronger when we actually do that together.
Thank you very much, Vanina. Very important, call to action, if I dare say. I mean, people, philanthropists of this world, step up your commitments step up to your responsibilities. It's not just about how you give, it's how you position, how much you give, and how you're going to work with others, which is always so difficult because, you know, we all know how hard it is. And when you just do, you know, your own organization, it can be complicated. So maybe away with the ego and let's step up responsibilities. Eric, I would like to turn to you now. So Eric Pilofsky was the Rockefeller Foundation. Your takeaways on trust-based philanthropy.
Sure, thanks. And like Vanina, we're being drawn in different directions, so I'll make my comment and then I have to dash off. I think if you're asking me to agree and disagree, I think the thing that I really appreciate the conversation we're having today. I think with respect to the comment about networks and sort of going, I think if I caught the rubric scaling out, I think I strongly agree that philanthropies have a real role to play in sort of building and sort of accentuating networks. In several cases, Rockefeller has been a connector of 2 or 3 organizations that are working sort of in parallel, but are going to be more than the sum of their parts if they work together. And so we have actually found in 2 cases that just I can think off the top of my head where we thought that the players working together would actually bring a very different perspective that they wouldn't have brought together individually. And so that building of the network, I think, is a really powerful tool that philanthropies have that they should be leaning into. And so I think that I very much strongly agree with that notion of scaling out. On the sort of, if I'm forced to find a disagreement, I think your comments about playing devil's advocate, I'm agreeing with you, which was disagreeing with somebody else. I think there is a real tension on impact. And I think we're under, you know, from our leadership, considerable pressure to be able to demonstrate concretely in elaborate detail the impact, the needle moving that we're making. And the idea that somehow is compatible with, here's the money, go do. Good luck, and we'll talk to you, you know, a couple of years from now, right? Like, it's just not compatible, and so we have to find a way. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, it's a rare moment. Maybe we should, but I think it's very hard to say, here's the money and go off, and then somehow be accountable to somebody about what the impact that we're trying to achieve and whether we got anywhere with it. And so I think the underlying message, I think, is fair and right, which is think smartly about all these papers that we're asking people to submit. Think smartly about, do we really need this or do we really need that? And to be honest about whether all of the paperwork, or what is the essence of what we're trying to get to. That point, I think, is fair. But to the idea that you can somehow both measure impact and say, good luck, go buy, you know, spend the money however you want, I just don't think they work together very well.
Words of wisdom, Eric, and you know, I know you have to go, but thank you very much. Yes, is impact compatible with good luck? I think that's going to be one of my takeaways for the day. Measuring impact. So you think, you know, I can tell also my kids, oh, here's a check. Good luck getting into Harvard and graduating. Tell me how that goes. See how, but I trust you, honey. Let me now turn to Antonio. Antonio, you're the CEO of the Thomson Reuters Foundation. What are your takeaways? And you have, let me say, a different model because you're an operating foundation. You're not a grant maker. So what does trust mean other than trust law?
Well, our corporate website is called trust.org, right? So we operate around the framework of trust. We are obviously, as you said, at the receiving end of philanthropy in the sense that the name unfortunately implies otherwise. So if I handed you over my LinkedIn, you will see requests for grants or people that want to sell stuff to Thomson Reuters. But we are an operating foundation. We receive 30% of our grants from as part of a rolling grant that comes from Thomson Reuters. And then the rest is externally fundraised. And we work with 2 different types of donors, right? So actually, the Postcode Lottery is one of our donors. So unrestricted grants. And at the same time, we work with government, so we receive public funding from the likes of the US government, the Norwegian government, the UK government, and obviously that is a complete different way of having to account for the way you spend your money. From one side, you have this trusted approach where obviously within the parameters you are able to spend funding, and on the other side, you need to account to the very last penny, obviously, given that it is public funding. I guess one thing I would mention is the leverage effect of what trusted philanthropy can achieve. And one example I would give is our Trust Law Network, which is the largest pro bono legal network in the world. It costs the foundation £1 million to run Trust Law, but at the same time, because we work with hundreds of law firms every year, we are able to generate $45 million of pro bono legal assistance every year. So that million of unrestricted funding allows us to leverage 40.
So this is what trust math looks like.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to turn, I don't know if it's possible, but we were supposed to also call, and my apologies that I didn't announce it, to Eric Costigan from the WHO Foundation. Eric is the Chief Development Officer. Is Eric able to also give us his... Oh, Eric, brilliant. Over to you.
So thank you for inviting me, and I'm sorry that's a little dark where I am, so I hope you can see me and it doesn't seem too spooky this close to Halloween on the other side. I think when we're talking about the work that we're doing at the WHO Foundation and looking at ways to support organizations to make the right decisions on the ground that then obviously bubble up into real health impact, what we're trying to do is not only look at funds and aggregate funding from a variety of sources outside, I'd say, like the usual suspects. So, for example, looking at the pool of capital outside of traditional name brand foundations that account for roughly 20% of all giving in a place like the United States, where the total giving is about $500 billion a year. Yeah, we're also trying to do that education work, right? And so as new philanthropists are getting involved and they're trying to navigate the increased complexity of a world where, while trying to have impact, understanding, for example, the intersection of climate change and health, there is complication on top of complication, and it has a tendency to essentially, freeze people in their tracks and then create a situation, a little bit of a deer in the headlight situation where no action is taken. So as we start to engage and as we start to point in the direction of areas, and for us, a focus at the very heart of our work on health equity and working at a community level, and then using the mechanisms within the WHO on a national, regional, and global level to help scale that impact, building that trust with on-the-ground implementers that are deep into the community and have the ability to work directly with, not only work directly with members that are at the front lines of health and climate issues, but really know the problem and love the problem versus love the solution. How do you translate that into conversations with new philanthropists, either from wealth transition or coming into their own new wealth through a variety of means, so that you're bridging a geographic and also sort of disparate gap in terms of understanding the role of the traditional global health ecosystem. This is not a language that they're used to speaking. They have day jobs, they're focused on other things, and trying to also build relevance to what's important in their own backyard. So finding that connectivity and bridging that gap and the communications and the translation and storytelling that's needed to do that effectively, while also tying it into broader, more global types of capabilities and audacious goals, if you will, is a challenge, but it's the challenge that we've set ourselves up for moving forward. Obviously, a lot of that effort involves sourcing relevant solutions at a very sort of granular level, as well as working with players at the sort of highest levels of international organizations, whether that's in Geneva, in our case, or elsewhere around the world, and how we're building those linkages. We also find it
Thank you, Eric. I'm so sorry. We're gonna have to transition because we have limited time, but this has been I liked what you've mentioned about localizing. I mean, and support becoming granular, and trust being placed with these communities that you work with. And you talked about the new donors. I imagine you're also talking about the ones contributing to the WHO Foundation. So bringing them on board with that mindset that, it's not necessarily about someone's name. It's more about, how are we going to deliver collective solutions and, what's the real impact for the people who are, whose lives are concerned. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn now to Christophe Salmon, who is Délégué Général, Fondation Crédit Mutuel Alliance Fédérale. So what are your takeaways and what do you take home on this trust-based philanthropy?
Je vais vous parler en français, si ça ou...
I'll speak French, if you don't mind.
Ce que je retiens, c'est que c'est une vraie question, en fait.
Well, what I retain is that it's a true question, this relationship of trust between philanthropists and associations. We're a recent foundation that was created 2 years ago, and it took us time to set it up because we spent a lot of time to think about the expectations about the associations, working in the field and which need philanthropists and sponsors. And it's a very unbalanced relationship because you have people who ask and people who give. And in such a relationship, you have to correct this imbalance. And you have to make sure that the philanthropist becomes a real partner and listens to the needs of the associations that they support. When we listened to the association, they told us that they were spending a great deal of time looking for philanthropists, trying to fund projects, and that projects are succeeding other projects, and that each time for each project you have to find funding, and this takes up a lot of energy and prevents them from actually working in the field. So we thought, based on this, that we had to renew the practices, the best practices of philanthropy, that we had to renew and change the type of trust that we give, because philanthropists always look for new projects, but what's interesting is action itself. So funding operating expenses, that is important. Giving visibility to a project is also important. How can you be efficient if you have funding only for the next year? We need to be able to support projects lastingly, because it's the only way they are going to be efficient and succeed. And in order to do that, you have to trust the project. Philanthropists have to learn how to take risk and accept to support innovative projects that might not succeed, that might not reach their end. We do our best for them to succeed, but there is some risk, and we have to accept the risk that they might fail before the end. And you need large resources, because if you want to support a project that is a structuring project and that is a long-term project, well, it requires a lot of money, a lot of investments. Our group took an important decision this year about societal dividends, and it means that during our strategic plan for the next 5 years, we'll allocate 15% of our net income to initiatives that are based on solidarity and helping the society. So in 4 years, it will be 2.5 billion that will be allocated to environmental initiatives based on solidarity for investments and also related to philanthropy. So a partnership relationship between philanthropists and associations is important. Thank you very much. I'll continue in French for a few minutes before giving the floor to James.
assez rare hein, d'entendre, surtout en français.
And it's very rare to listen to these principles of commitment, especially in French. Operating expenses, you've highlighted a point that we've been discussing with NGOs for a long time, because that's dismissed that everything goes to the project. But of course, you have to pay the people who manage the project and who manage it well, usually. And many philanthropists set a limitation to the percentage allocated to operating expenses. But it's like asking a child to go to school and not giving the child a train ticket or a bus ticket. So it's ridiculous. And you also talked about the long term. And here you find the principles of commitment of philanthropy based on risk, because you invest capital. It's not charity. You work with partners, so the center of gravity shifts a bit. So you take risk and you act in the long term with large investments, because you can't change something in the short term. And you mix up investments and grants as well. So it's philanthropy 2.0.
To you, James, and you're going to have the last words of wisdom before I give 30 seconds heads up to my panelists for their last few points. So, James, what has been your takeaways? Trust-based? Do we buy into that? Is there a one-size-fits-all? What is it going to be?
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to do something you don't deserve and answer your question because you've made me go last. But you said something that I agree with and something that I disagree with. And I think the first thing is that the really strong agreement with what trust-based philanthropy is trying to solve, which one is a trust deficit between philanthropy and the people it's trying to serve. And we haven't really talked about those people today. So we've talked about the grantees, but we haven't talked that much about people in society. And we've done a recent survey, which is going to come out on Giving Tuesday, which shows that actually in India, China, South Africa, Nigeria, Germany, the UK, US, and France, and which shows that of the concerns that people have about philanthropy, the most significant are a lack of understanding of the local context. And that is actually more significant than some of the things we see reported in the press a lot, like tax or influence and the like. So the problem, hard agree. But I'm going to disagree with everyone that trust-based philanthropy is the only future solution. And I'm not actually going to do it on an impact argument, which is what you would expect. I think on the very metrics that trust-based philanthropy is trying to achieve its goals, which are to change power dynamics, to support more progressive causes, and to actually help change, it doesn't always achieve that. So firstly, it doesn't necessarily widen access to different grantees. Because for trust philanthropy to work, it requires trust. And it requires trust between foundations who often are in pursuit of a specific mission. And they won't fund organizations that are not equally in support of that mission. It's much easier to fund a project in an organization that isn't fully in support of your mission than to fund an entire organization. I think the second problem is that it's not necessarily progressive. Trust-based philanthropy has been around for a very long time, and probably the most successful examples are US conservative funders who funded groups like the anti-abortion movement and anti-gay rights movements. They were very effective. So yeah, trust-based philanthropy, very effective, but not necessarily in the direction that I think a lot of these people in the room think that trust-based philanthropy goes. And then finally, I don't think it's always helpful for change, because in the most famous example of trust-based philanthropy, who you mentioned earlier, there is no dialogue between the philanthropist and the grantee. There is no exchange of power. It's charity. Someone says, I have chosen you, that money arrives. There's no dialogue. There's no argument or involvement about how that money should be spent. And so the funder doesn't change. They don't have the conversation and relationship with the grantee that results in change of the philanthropist. And so I want to make a case for an alternative to be added to the trust-based philanthropy model. Trust is a good model in certain cases, especially when you have great funders like here today. But I think collaborative philanthropy, which no one has talked about, is a really important part of the system. And if we look at the collaboratives that are being set up in the US, for example, you'll find that more than 50% of those collaborative models are led by people of color, compared to 10% of normal donors. So donors are forced into situations where they lose control of their money with other groups of people who equally lose control of their money and then are allocated to grantees. So that removes the power from the funder. It gives it to a different vehicle, but also doesn't result in necessarily giving up all control, losing all the power over impact, or not necessarily being progressive. So I think great reasons today about why trust-based philanthropy is a part of the solution, but I think we need to be careful and not think it's a panacea. It's one of many things that need to change in the philanthropic system.
Wow, thank you, James. It was worth the wait. I like that. I like that nuancing of the trust-based model, which is true, has still has limitations. I would like to give 30 seconds to each of my panelists for anything that they would like to add or end with. If you would prefer, you can also imagine you have a magic wand. What would you do, to change the way this giving relationship goes? So, Samira, I'm going to start with you.
So I have 30 seconds. So I'm going to say that I think with trust-based philanthropy, it's not the only tool in the toolbox. It's one of many. And there are examples like ISBN in Brazil, which is changing its own governance model, looking at organizational change and actually having the dialogue with partners and to see how they can do micro grants and unrestricted funding. So I think there are models. I guess my call to action would be we want more of these stories of how this is happening, because that inspires change. It gives us an idea of the challenges, how you're overcoming them, and what is the change that needs to happen internally within an organization in order to create a ripple impact in the sector. And lastly, I'd say that in terms of, it was said before, we need to maximize collective power and leverage today. In a session that I was before, they said multiple allyship and partnerships is going to be really, really important. So please come and join us, join the Transformation Initiative. And if you'd like to challenge more, I would be happy to take anything else up after this session. Thank you so much.
My 30-second conclusion is because the philanthropy sector in China is so new, even though there are challenges, but I do see there are opportunities really to educate and convince this new wave of billionaires and philanthropists, because they don't have an existing sort of a set of thinking like how to give, their money away. And my call for action is we organized a US learning trip before COVID. That was back in 2019. So we took a group of entrepreneurs to the US and visited Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, basically all the established foundations, really to have them to share perspectives with other donors, in a more sophisticated market. And I'm very much look forward to, bring a group of people here next year to Europe, and really, to listen to all the best practices and all the different ways of thinking, right? There's the don't trust, and there's the trust ones, and let them decide what they wanted to do.
Thank you so much. Well, for me, I cannot agree more. It's trust-based philanthropy. It's all about people. And also for us, it's all about collaboration and work in close partnership with those charity partners that we fund for these long-term donations. So actually, we at Postcode Lottery, we even involve people, citizens playing in our lottery. So it's all about people, it's all about involvement, and also about showing the important work of civil society organizations like we're seeing here today at the Space for Solutions. And I think those initiatives show that people can together achieve a lot, and they give messages of hope and messages that we all need in the world of today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're 2 minutes past the time, which is quite heroic. So I would like to extend a big thank you and round of applause to our discussants and panelists.
Thank you.
If you could pause, Thank you very much. Sorry, just to say thank you. So I think you're maybe the takeaway, at least my takeaway would be trust is not an on or off button. There's also different tools in the toolbox. There are various shades of gray, and it's, there is no, as often, there is no silver bullet. It's about power. It's about localizing, understanding the issues, but it's also about impact. So, how do we pick that equation? That'd be for our next conversation. And I will see some of you at COP28, if not before. And I wish you a very good rest of the day and of the forum. And thank you for being such a patient audience.